Gentlelady yields back. I yield to Mrs. Moore from Wisconsin. You're recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for joining us today. We've heard a lot of discussion today about the earned income tax credit and the audits and the perhaps fraud that's been committed, and you were unable to sort of monetize the amount of fraud that was as compared to corporate fraud and loss of revenue. I guess we've had estimates that there's, like, at minimum, close to maybe $600 billion to $1 trillion worth of lost income from corporations. Is that anything, even though you can't nail it down to the penny, is that anything close to what you're experiencing with the earned income tax credit? Just sort of a back of the envelope sort of assessment?
So we have a tax gap analysis where we can evaluate where the differences are between what is paid versus what is owed. And the last estimate that we provided estimated at roughly $650 billion a year in this gap.
So are you guessing that maybe the earned income tax credit fraud or whatever, and I'm sure you can recover all of it since it's not very complicated to catch an earned income tax problem. You don't even need a person. Probably the machine will find that. Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, Congresswoman, for me, it's about priorities.
Yeah.
And what are our priorities within earned income tax credit program integrity, and what are our priorities in terms of tax evasion amongst the wealthy? And that's what I'm seeking to establish.
Okay, so let me go on because I hadn't really planned to talk about this. It's just that my colleagues have raised it. What would you say that the fraud rate for the earned income tax credit is as compared to the low uptake of it? The numbers of people who deserve it and could use it and don't apply for it is. What is that number?
Yeah, and again, I don't have the specific fraud rate. It's not something that we measure.
It's not fraud. I'm talking about the people who don't even claim it.
And this is part of the challenge. We believe that there is a material gap in the number.
I mean, there's millions of dollars left on the table.
Agreed.
I think that families and kids need, particularly since we have such a stingy child tax credit. You know, we have harsh requirements for TANF, and people are leaving money on the table with the earned income tax credit. You know, I think, I believe it was my good colleague that asked you a question about child support. And I think that in the absence of an adequate child tax credit and earned income tax credit low uptake in that it's really important that we do child support tax collections. And I understand that these contractors have to be 6103 compliant. But we found this problem even with states that administer the child tax credit for tribes. And so I am wondering, you know, they're subject to these audits, and I'm wondering how long that's going to go on. It's really hurting tribal communities and not getting these monies. Can you quickly comment?
Well, I want to work with tribal communities directly. I know that tribal communities face unique challenges in terms of meeting their tax responsibilities or getting access to tax benefits. So if I can learn more about the specific issue,
I will. That's right. Just learn about sovereignty, and that'll help you figure it out. Let me ask you some questions before my time expires. Very quick questions. I'm not asking you to opine on policy, okay?
Yes.
I'm just asking you to affirm some things that I think I already know. This essential government function test, is that an impediment to tribal nations' use of government bonds? Yes or no?
I know it's something that that is more in a policy shop, but I do believe.
I'm just saying.
I'm saying this is what we've heard from tribal communities, and that's why it's important to engage with them on solutions.
So same thing, because they're going to cut me off, I guarantee you. The new market tax credit set aside for tribes, the low-income housing tax credits, and setting aside a housing tax credit program. Would that increase the effectiveness and administrability of these programs from the perspective of the IRS?
It's something that I want to work with and coordinate with Treasury and the tribal outreach programs that they do and get back to you on that.
Well, Commissioner, just let me join the chairman, the ranking member, all of my colleagues in thanking you for being here and being very patient. As you can see, we're all coming back and forth for lunch and bathroom breaks and everything. So you've been very good, and I want to appreciate you.
And Congresswoman, I do now know that 20% of eligible taxpayers don't claim the earned income tax credit. So that means 1 in 5, and that is something we have to address.
That's a lot of money
Yes.
that's left on the table.
Absolutely.
Versus how many frauds that you find. And of course, you can collect every dime of that money because it's not hard to audit an EITC recipient versus someone who has 500 corporations and billions of dollars. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
I gave you an extra 53 seconds. You just remember that.
I'm going to remember that.
Helping you out. All right, the gentlelady yields back. Mr. Murphy from North Carolina, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for coming today. I was just looking at your CV. I saw you went to Duke and to UNC.
I did.
So if you can answer one question today, Duke or UNC?
Duke.
All right, well, I got no more to say to you. All right, let's get down, actually. So questions. California and North Carolina, New York have the most billionaires. And you're saying that it's a high rate of cheating. Have you ever correlated any of them with the Carolina? Are they paying the California taxes and the New York taxes?
I don't have that analysis at my fingertips. We're focusing.
No. What I'm saying is because we're talking about a lot of folks not paying their taxes. Look, I'm 100%. People need to pay their taxes. Period. I don't care what income bracket you're in. But if we're talking about millionaires and billionaires not paying their fair share, which is what we hear the president say a lot, those are the two biggest states are in California and New York. So it'd be nice to know, you don't have to answer this, but it'd be nice to know, are they doing that for New York and California, and are their particular revenue departments going after them? Fair question.
It is a fair question. And I would, I would want to coordinate a response to that after talking to those states. We are not necessarily focused regionally. We're focused on the types of evasions
I get it.
that corporations are engaged in. Many of them are maybe operating in California, incorporated in Delaware. The reality is that the question is the underlying behavior.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Were you aware that the Biden administration has said that TikTok is not to be allowed on government devices?
I am aware of that, yes.
All right. So this is just very troubling to me. So the OMB issued guidance February 27, 2023, agencies were how to implement this law. DIGA found that 23 devices used by IRS still had access to TikTok, and this is still troubling. It took the IRS, this thing was issued, TIGTA issued this to the IRS in May. The IRS did not take action until August of 2023. Why?
I'm not sure of the facts of that, but that does seem unacceptable, and I will get to the bottom of it.
Do you personally believe, I think there are many members of Congress, especially over in the Senate, Democratic Senator Intelligence, Senator Warner, believes that TikTok is a security risk to this country?
Yeah,
So I'm just saying this is his word. It's generally considered a risk, and I just, to the life of me, don't understand why these are still on devices. What really bothers me, we're talking about folks working from home, is that the bring your own device policy for the IRS is still not enforcing this ban on TikTok. Can you speak to that?
Well, I want to make sure I understand the TIGTA recommendation and where we are in closing it out. But I absolutely agree. Whether people are working remotely or working on site, we have to abide by these security standards, and any lapse cannot be tolerated. So we need to be.
It took 8 months for the IRS to really update this policy. That's not acceptable. It wouldn't be acceptable in business. It shouldn't be acceptable in any government agency. Let me ask you about the Criminal Investigation Unit and their access to TikTok, because it seems that they're kind of trying to get a waiver for this. Are you aware of any of that?
I am aware of the fact that that in certain cases when our law enforcement division is working to impede, disrupt, and hold accountable criminal enterprises. Sometimes they have to use tools that to understand and solve those crimes. So it's not. It's a kind of an apple and an orange versus an IRS employee who should not have TikTok on their device versus a law enforcement official who's using.
Are you aware of that requisite, of that asking for this, for the criminal investigation unit to have a waiver?
I would want to get, before I got into more detail, I'd want to go back and get more detail, but I am aware of that, yes.
Yeah, would you mind getting back to my office about
Yes.
that? It's Murphy from North Carolina, who's a big Tar Heel fan. And by the way,
Yeah, I
Shefsky
really
lost
am
his
going to
last
regret
game.
that answer. I just was at UNC speaking, and I feel affinity there, but it's a long story.
I'm messing with you. Just one last question. Artificial intelligence. You know, this is the gold rush for this country and the world for that matter. Bias, absolute bias, will be a thing we're going to have to fight. And I hope that, given some of the biases that have been stated by the department and some individuals, that I have your commitment to do your very, very best, that the IRS does not have any biases when using artificial intelligence in looking at who to audit, who not to audit, because we saw that going after Republicans before. We saw some real problems with who were audited. And artificial intelligence is a tool, but it should not be used as a political weapon in the IRS.
You have my commitment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Next, Mr. Kufzoff, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for appearing today. I'd like to go back, if I can, please, to the GAO report that Congressman Estes was asking about. This is the one dated July 13th, 2023. The title of it is Preliminary Results Show Federal Buildings Remain Underutilized Due to Longstanding Challenges and Increased Telework. If I can, just let me read maybe 2 sentences. 17 of the 24 federal agencies in GAO's review used an estimated average 25% or less of their headquarters building capacity in a 3-week sample period across January, February, and March of 2023. On the higher range, agencies used an estimated 39 to 49% of the capacity of their headquarters on average. Do you know, on an average day, Commissioner, how much of your headquarters building is being used?
In Washington, I don't have that number at my fingertips.
Would you say it's less than 50%?
It may be because, as I mentioned earlier, overall, the IRS is roughly in line with the government-wide standard of 50%. So because it's an average, it may be under.
We've heard different things in questions today to you from members. Anecdotally, subjectively, what I hear from my staff and from CPAs and practitioners that have to reach the IRS is that it's a real struggle to get a hold of somebody. And you talked about earlier some of the challenges with the phone, the callback, which I appreciate.
Yes.
I would contend, respectfully, that not having employees in the office and having them work remotely presents challenges not only to your agency, but to the people that have to interact with it. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that it depends on what the function is. There are moments, for example, when whether it's a weather event, streets are shut down, we don't want to lose productivity. So we set people up to be able to work remotely where they can. I would also...
I get if there's a weather situation, but if we're talking about a day where the weather is fine, wouldn't it make more sense from a productivity standpoint to have employees physically present at the IRS than working remotely?
In some cases, yes. In other cases, it's less relevant. I can give you examples of where it's highly relevant. For example, in our taxpayer assistance centers, those are our walk-in centers, and those are fully staffed 5 days a week. Everyone's there at all times. Also, if you visited, and you're all invited to come to one of our campus locations, and you'll see those campuses teaming with employees that are opening envelopes and doing other things to manage the tax system. And those individuals have to be on site, and they are on site. For me, what I look at is
you've had a number of questions here about security. We're all concerned about it. I know you're concerned about it, whether it's Mr. Littlejohn or whatever, as it relates to taxpayer information. From a security standpoint, wouldn't it be safer and more secure to have taxpayer information accessed at an IRS office versus an IRS employee's home?
There are steps that you can take to ensure appropriate security, whether the employee is in a SCIF, in a non-SCIF, or remote. And we have to make sure that we're securing, because there may be situations, whether it's a weather event or otherwise, or a pandemic, where we have to ensure the right level of security regardless of where the employee is.
It's a true statement that IRS employees, when they are working remotely from home, can access taxpayer information, right?
Certain employees, depending on the need, yes.
Nothing to prevent the employee's 19-year-old son walking behind the screen from taking a screenshot of whatever's on the screen, correct?
That would be a violation of that employee's responsibility to protect information. There would be significant consequences for that, and therefore virtually all IRS employees are very rigid in how taxpayer information is handled, whether it's handled on their computer screen in a remote location or on an IRS site.
But it's true that that situation wouldn't occur if that employee were in the office, right?
That, I don't want to engage in hypotheticals, but that doesn't make sense.
That employee's 19-year-old son would not be physically, right?
But there could be a visitor in the building, and that's why it's so important that whether you're on site or you're at home, that you are extraordinarily careful about who has visibility to information that you're the only person who should have visibility.
I can cite other examples, just like I did about the 19-year-old son in the home. There's no doubt, though, that situation wouldn't occur if that employee were in the office, in the IRS office, correct?
What I'm suggesting is hypothetical. I don't want to engage in hypotheticals.
Yes or no, and then I'll allow you to finish.
I feel like it's dangerous to go into hypotheticals, because then someone's going to turn around and ask me, what if someone has a take your daughter to work day and they're walking through the office? So there are all these situations. My common denominator, bottom line, is that each employee must rigidly and relentlessly protect that information from unauthorized access from any 19-year-old, whether they're visiting their parent in the office or whether they're at home.
Let the record show that you were non-responsive. Thank you, Commissioner.
Fair enough.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Schneider is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Werfel, for joining us today. I want to start by saying I have appreciated working with you and your staff, who have been very helpful with us in dealing with our constituent questions. Before I go to a question, let me touch briefly on casework. We've been in touch with your team on a handful of IRS cases that we've been unable to make headway as we were hoping. Can I just get a commitment that we'll continue to work on these to try to get them done? And I will go back to the previous. My kids are now 29 and 30, and I worked before coming to Congress with a lot of confidential client information. Whether my kids were visiting me in the office, as they often did, or I was working at home, as I often did, it was imperative that I kept that information confidential. And I think what I heard you saying is that that's the expectation of IRS employees, that information is kept confidential irrespective of where they are, who might be visiting.
One of the reasons why I was struggling with the question in the hypothetical is I don't want to signal to any IRS employee that they can let their guard down no matter where they are, whether they're at home, whether they're at the office. It's absolutely critical that we have rigid policies and procedures in place to prevent unauthorized access.
Right.
And that's what I really want to emphasize.
Thank you. I just make that clear. Let me also, I'll take another minute. We've talked about the IRA and the impact it's had, and you've touched on some of the things, but the handful of things, I'll let you reiterate them, that the progress made. There's been discussion of here saying it's not quite perfect, but I'm going to focus on progress, not perfection. Where's the progress we've made over the last
things are
couple years?
trending in the right direction. I don't think there's any way that I will rest and come up to this table and say we're done. We're not done. And I want to hear about the taxpayer concerns. But I also want to recognize the before and after of a funded tax agency versus a non-funded tax agency. And the before and after is stark in terms of what we're able to deliver in terms of taxpayer service. And that means if we're funded, our walk-in centers are open. We can have Saturday hours. We can have special events where we're training people about how to use their, how to get free assistance. Webinars are in place. All these different resources that we can invest in reaching out to taxpayers and helping them meet their tax responsibility.
Is the difference of 85% of calls going unanswered and 85% of calls now being answered?
Exactly. And the other thing that I haven't had a chance to emphasize as much as I'd like to is the before and after of being funded in terms of what we can do to protect honest taxpayers from scams and the perpetrators that are involved in them. And if we're not funded, we're on our heels. The tax system remains complicated. It remains a playground for scam artists to exploit honest taxpayers, scare them, call up someone who's elderly, pretend they're the IRS, convince them to take out their credit card and pay a phantom debt. An underfunded agency, an underfunded IRS means that can be exploited more and more. A funded IRS means we can work to disrupt those types of scams. We can increase our education. We can work with local partners. And we can put tools on the web so that you can either help your elderly parent or that elderly parent can have access to figure out, is this really the IRS? These are tools that other tax jurisdictions are putting in place. And we absolutely have to, in order to protect taxpayers from these risks, put these tools in place. And if we don't have the funding, we can't do it. So these are the choices that we
Thank
have.
you. So if we don't fund and we can't protect those taxpayers, they're at the short end of the stick. They're put at risk. At the same time, you've said there's a estimated $650 billion per year tax gap. Taxes not being paid. Who really suffers when people cheat on their taxes, don't pay what they owe?
It's the people who pay their taxes, because they're shouldering the broader load for funding the government and its critical operations. And that's why it's so important to have equity. And that's why it's important to prioritize our enforcement efforts for where we think evasion is most problematic. And the point that I've been making today is when I arrived at the IRS after years of underfunding, I asked the team, where are we most exposed? Where are the risks the highest? Where has this underfunding caused the most damage? And one of the key areas was our ability to keep pace with complex tax situations where evasion was a risk. There are complex tax situations where evasion is not a risk, and that is a place that we will not focus on, but it's the place where there's a risk of evasion.
Yeah, and I'm at the end of my time, so I'll ask the question, and actually I would appreciate an answer in writing, is what is it that makes a complex return, and why does that complexity increase the likelihood or the ability of people to avoid paying taxes that are owed? And I'd like to be able to share that.
Well, just a quick example would be if you're operating in multiple countries,
right,
and they have different tax laws, and you're shielding your profits in the U.S. to get a lower tax, when the reality is that your economic activity is in the U.S. and you actually owe, and you shouldn't be moving and making it look like to the IRS that your activity is elsewhere in a more tax-advantaged jurisdiction. That means that those that are accurately reporting their profits, the companies that are paying a larger share than those that are cheating the system.
Yeah, it's not just companies, it's both the individuals who are able to shelter money in other
That's what we're trying to
jurisdictions.
close the gap on.
All right, thank you, and I yield.